Hi guys, I put up a post last night about homemade winemaking. Sorry about the traffic in the back. I'm in my little backyard here. I told you guys I'd give you a video on how I do what I do. Start out by saying there are a lot of different methods for doing this. Everybody, I'm sure, has got their own opinion, and I'm sure some people will feel the need to post them. I'm just doing what I like to do. It's what works for me. I'm not making some $1,000 a bottle stuff, but it's good for me to sit at home with my wife, enjoy an evening. Okay, there are a lot of ways to do this. First, I'll show you. We start right from the fresh fruit a lot of the times. These are our black raspberries right here. My son is helping me film here, so I apologize if it gets twitchy. These are where we were picking black raspberries. This is a new bush. We just started these last year, but there's another fully established patch around the bend. So my kids have been picking and helping us with everything for years. I don't exactly call this a homestead, but I live in town. And here, let me see this. I live in town. I've got a small backyard, but we try to do as much as we can in our little bit of space. We've got our black raspberries here. We're starting red raspberries here. We've got sunflowers because all the kids on the neighborhood love them. Carrots and garlic in our box there. And then we got 5 inches of rain last night, so I can't walk through the garden right now. It's kind of soupy. But we've got our cucumbers, our corn, all of our different types of hot and sweet peppers, our tomatoes. We do what we can for the small amount of space we've got. Eventually we'd like to get something bigger, but future plans. Anyway, back to the winemaking here. Let me go ahead and put this onto my side. Take over the camera again. There are a few basic things that you end up needing. First off, we start with our fruit prep. Different methods work better for different types of fruit. Honestly, for bigger whole fruit like apples or pears, things of that nature, I like this right here. Makes it quick and easy. It's just an electric fruit juicer, something you buy at Walmart. If you like the slower hand methods, we've got systems like this. It just presses it through into the bottom. They've got interchangeable screens for different sized material. You use these for making salsa, anything like that. A lot of you guys may be familiar with some of this stuff. Then we also have, for berries, I prefer a unit like this. High-speed juicers with the berries, it tends to foam a lot of the juice, and it's just a mess. You don't get very good yield out of it. Something like this, it's really hard to get all the seed out of, so a crank method with a berry screen like this is really great for berries. I do the same method with all kinds of fruit: pears, apples, grapes, any kind of berries. We find U-Pick Farms. There's several people that let us have access to their fruit trees that, they get what they want for the year, and then the rest of it's trash in their yard. They ask us to come pick it up. We're happy to do it. So on to the winemaking. Once you get your juice started, you usually want to mix it at least 50-50 with water, because it's very thick, especially once it's fermented, it'll get thicker. So we mix it about 50-50 with water, and it stretches our juice out for most things. And then you have to measure your sugar content, which is very, very important. Sugar is the food for your yeast. If you don't have enough sugar to produce a high enough alcohol content, you're not going to get what you want. If you put too much sugar into it, it can actually become toxic to your yeast and kill it. So knowing how much yeast to add is really, or how much sugar to add to your juice is really key to having a good product, which is where this tool comes in. This is called a hydrometer. Just simple graduated cylinder, and this part's the special part. I'll come up here where you can see it. This is actually one of the more fancy models. Most of the scales go into the decimals. I can't see how well this is showing on the camera here. Okay. Most of them have a decimal scale. I don't know if that's too blurry or not. But this one also has a PAV scale, which is much easier to use. The PAV scale is 1%, or how much sugar 1 PAV can be converted to 1% alcohol. So usually you have to hit a minimum 10% with wines for them to go shelf stable, to where they'll sterilize themselves and not go bad. You can go up to about a 17-18% before the alcohol gets high enough in content that it actually kills the yeast that's producing it. So there's a limit to what you can do with wine. And all your high content alcohol, all your whiskeys, all of that's all got to be gone through another distilling process. It goes through this same process, and then it gets distilled to separate the alcohol artificially. You really cannot create that much alcohol content with yeast. It's not possible. So what this tool does is this measures the specific gravity of your liquid. It measures how dense it is, and the more sugar you've got diluted, the more dense the liquid is going to get. So 0 is neutral, that's water. That's the specific gravity of water. Everything you add to there makes this rise higher and higher. You want your water levels, I like mine about 14 to 15% alcohol. Alcohol is lighter than water, so this will actually dry down to about a -1. So I like to bump my sugar contents up to where it says about 14. Then when it dries all the way down to the -1, I'll back sweeten it to taste and finish it out and put it in the fridge. There's a little bit more to it than that, but I'll get to that in a minute. There is no way to specifically measure alcohol content. The only way to calculate that is you have to take a before measurement with one of these tubes, and an after measurement with a hydrometer, and then the subtracting one from the other will give you your percentage of alcohol. So once we get our sugar content up to where we want it to be, just personal preference, I like mine about 15%, so I bring my PAV up to about 14. Then I add one of these. This is called a Campden tablet. This is actually a chemical called potassium metabisulfate, and you can buy that chemical flat by itself and use it this way. It can also be used as a sanitizer to make sure everything's clean and sterile. But the Campden tablets are a measured out amount. This is 1 tablet for 1 gallon of juice. What this does is this will kill off any type of natural yeast, any type of natural bacteria, or anything that could actually be in it. This will kill it. We add this, we crush this into a powder and mix it in, and let it set for a full 24 hours. If you try to add your yeast at the same time, this will kill the yeast that you're adding. The yeast is a bacteria. So this will denaturate, and in 24 hours it will have killed everything that's in your juice, and you'll be sterile, ready to go. At that point, I add a few chemicals here. These are all relatively cheap, and I will make sure I put a link into the company that I buy all of this stuff from. They're reasonably cheap, and they can ship it straight to your house. These bottles here, these are about $2.50, $3 a piece, no more than that for the 1 ounce bottles if you're just looking for a small amount to start. The first one is yeast nutrient, and I'll show you the bottles up close here so you can see what I'm talking about. What this is basically fertilizer and food for your yeast. Keeps it strong and healthy. This stuff is 1 teaspoon per gallon of juice that you put in. This is Yeast Energizer. This stuff is, again, just vitamins. Think about it as a good multivitamin for your yeast. It keeps it strong and healthy. This stuff is a half a teaspoon per gallon. You really don't need both of these. One or the other would suffice, but both can't hurt. You want a good, strong, healthy fermentation. This one here is the real kicker. This is something that you definitely want to have. This is called pectic enzyme. All fruit has natural pectin in it. It's the same stuff that you use to make jelly. You buy it powdered in a store to make your jellies. This destroys pectin. Pectin, the small amounts won't make your wine jelly or anything, but it will cause it to be foggy, hazy, maybe unclear, and it's just kind of undesirable. Pectic enzyme will eat that natural pectin out of the juice and make sure that everything comes out fine. This stuff is a half a teaspoon per gallon. You don't really need much of this stuff, and it's really cheap, so I mean, there's no reason to skimp on it. Then you deal with your yeast strains. Like I said, you can only really get up to a 17 or 18% with yeast. It's just not possible to go above that. That being said, different types of yeast can tolerate higher or lower levels of alcohol content. Your standard bread yeast might be 7 or 8%, which is not high enough proof to make it shelf stable. If you leave it like that with bread yeast, it's going to go bad and you're probably going to get sick. There's a lot of strains on the market, and to the finer taste and the professional makers, they might want to get into more than this. But for me, I like these two. These are my favorites. This is a Red Star Premier QV. It goes up to approximately 18%. It's a champagne yeast. And this one is the Lavlin 1118C. This is another champagne yeast. Again, goes up to about 18%. I'm still experimenting back and forth between these to see which one I like better, but they both have really not let me down. They're great strains. These packets are about $1 a piece, and one packet is supposed to be enough to do 5 gallons. I go a little heavier than that. These packets are measured in grams, and of course when you're adding things to a recipe, everything wants teaspoons and tablespoons, and how do you convert grams to teaspoons? I did find a conversion chart, but the easiest thing I came down to is it's just under a teaspoon, and overdoing it a little bit won't hurt anything. So I go to just almost a teaspoon of one of these packets of dry yeast per gallon of wine must that I'm going to do. These need to be activated, and there's instructions on the back of the packaging. What you do, this is dry, deactivated yeast. What you need to do is get some water up to about 110 degrees. Too high is bad, too low is too bad. But about 110 degrees, you add just a little bit of sugar to about a half a cup of water, and you mix this in with it. You just pour it in on the top and let it float. After 15 minutes, you should see that it's more than doubled in size. It'll start to fall to the bottom of the glass, and then you should start seeing activity. Like, it should start to plume back up, very much like little volcanic plumes or a lava lamp type effect. When it starts pluming back up from the bottom, that means your yeast is healthy and active, and it's time to go ahead and add that to your must. Keep in mind, you don't do any of this until after your 24-hour period with your Campden tablets. These have to be completely washed through before you do anything else. Once you add that, I'll cover it with a towel, a clean washcloth, and then, rubber band it around the top so that no flies or any bugs or anything can get into it. And I'll let it set for 4 or 5 days. It's part of that you'll see in the pictures that I've been putting into the other post, and I'll link them in the bottom of this post. Those pictures are the yeast forming on the top of the juice. I'm sorry I can't actually make a batch to show you, but every jug I've got right now is going. It'll probably be 2 months before I've got empty jugs to start another batch. All the foam that you see in the secondary picture that's risen to the top of that jug, it'll start to break up, and you'll start seeing more bubbling activity and more churning motions, and that stuff will start to churn in the liquid. When that starts to happen, I will remove the cloth and then replace it with just a simple balloon. Most people like to use a rubber bung and a vapor lock with liquid. You know, that works great, but this is simple and easy too. It works just as well. I'll take a toothpick or a pin and punch just a little tiny hole in there, and then put this over the top. The fermentation process will produce gas. You want to be able to bleed that gas off, so this balloon will let it blow up, and that pinhole will slowly let all that air leak out. And as that pressure leaks out, your gases escape, which is fine. And but since the balloon is always going to have just a little bit of pressure in it, even at the end, like here, I'll speed this up. It'll probably look like about like that on the top of your jug. It won't ever draw any air in because there is still some pressure being held inside, so it can't draw new oxygen in. This oxygen starves the process and slows your fermentation down a little bit. You want your fermentation to be a fairly slow speed, not so low that it will let your juice go bad before it hits a shelf-stable point, but you don't want it to go overnight. It usually gets a better flavor if it lasts a little bit longer. For this process, usually it's about 4 to 6 weeks before fermentation is done. The balloon will go flat and just droop over on the top of the jug. Sometimes it'll even suck down into the jug when it's done, and you'll stop seeing bubbles in it. That tells you that your fermentation process is done. At that point, all you have to do is leave it still, wait until all the sediment, anything that's in it, settles all down to the bottom. You'll have a layer probably usually about 1 inch to 1.5 inches, depends on how much fruit sediment's left in there. And that is dead yeast, and your fruit matter and whatnot will settle to the bottom. And what's on top will be your nice, clear, pretty wine. It should dry all the way down into the negatives on specific gravity. At that point, when it stops bubbling, that's when you get out your hydrometer again, take your second test, and make sure that it's all the way down. If not, you may have to add some yeast energizer to it to kind of kickstart the process again. As long as it's gotten down somewhere close to the 0 mark or below, you're doing really good. All the fermentation process should be done in a relatively stable environment. You don't want drastic temperature swings up and down. 70 to 75 degrees is about perfect for the yeast to ferment, and you want it to be dark. Sunlight, the radiation in sunlight can damage your yeast cells. So that's really all there is to it. Once you get your sediment settled down, you take a hose, start a siphon, just a simple hose, and siphon off the top all the way down as close as you can get to that sediment without starting to suck the sediment back up. Suck that out into another jug, and then you sweeten its taste. Usually 1 cup of sugar gives about 2 to 2.5% alcohol by volume, your PAV scale. I tend to like my wines right around a 2. So considering it usually dries just a little below 1, about 1 cup of sugar per gallon of what I siphon off is what I'll add to it, and then I put it in the fridge. There will still be some yeast cells in the wine at this point. At that point, you've got to once you put more sugar into it, you need to put it in the refrigerator and keep it there until you drink it. You can buy some some stabilizing agents like sorbates or they're artificial preservatives meant to kill any yeast that's left in the wine. But there's no need to go to that extent. I'm not storing this for super long times. I just take a gallon out, I'll back sweeten it, put it into the fridge, and when it's gone, I'll pull another one out of the shelf, siphon it, and back sweeten it, put it straight into the fridge. As long as the yeast stays below 50 degrees, it will stay inactive. I do these in 1 gallon jugs. You can get 3, 5, 6 gallon carboys. Some people use food grade 5 gallon buckets. I prefer to use the small 1 gallon table jug wine bottles. It lets me, like my black raspberry that I started this post about, I've got 3 gallons in there. Yes, I could do that in a 3 gallon carboy, and it wouldn't be any big deal. It would come out the same. But what if I wanted to try to sweeten some with honey or some with brown sugar? These are experiments I've tried with other kinds. You can sweeten with about anything that's got sugar content. Just make sure that your sugar contents get right on the scale, and you can use about anything. You can use whole maple syrup. You can even do this from juice that you buy from the store. Just make sure that you're measuring your sugar contents before and after. If you do use juice from the store, though, read the label and make sure there is no chemicals involved that end with sorbate or sulfates. Those two are artificial preservatives, and they'll stop a fermentation process. But that only rules out maybe 10% of the juices that you can buy in the store. You can try all kinds of different stuff. The Ocean Spray cranberry lime juice makes a fantastic wine this method if you ever want to try it. I guess that's really all I've got to say on the matter. If you guys have any questions, feel free to send me some messages or reply to the post. I will probably post this on YouTube and then link it because I have problems with large uploads to Facebook sometimes. Enjoy, guys.